Welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly video roundtable discussion show where we discuss all things fire service related. Firefighting Today is a production of PeteLamb.com. And now your host, Chief Peter Lamb.
Good evening and welcome. Appreciate everyone joining us tonight. It should be a lively show tonight. That doesn't necessarily mean productive, but it does mean lively. So we'll take that for what it's worth. So a couple of quick ground rules as we do every week. If you happen to be watching us live on the YouTube chat, certainly leave a YouTube comment. We'll try to bring that right into the panel. We'll get your interaction as quickly as we can. There is a little time lag, and that trips us up now and again, but if you're watching us live there, if you're watching us on the website and you happen to have Twitter available to you, then certainly use @PeteLamb. That will pop up, and we'll try to get that to interact with us as well. So let's get the panel introduced, and then we're talking all about ventilation tonight. So let's get the panel introduced. We'll start with Chief Whitley. Say hello.
Hi, folks. Warren Whitley, retired Assistant Chief from Prince William County, Virginia, enjoying the evening on my porch.
It's a wonderful thing. And you are in North Carolina, right?
Correct.
All right. Chief Fling, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Fling, I'm a past chief with the Dixels Fire Department on Long Island, and I am enjoying the evening in my basement.
Just not a bad thing.
Chief, not quite as nice.
Chief Woolery, say hello. Lane.
Yeah, hey, Pete. Lane Woolery here, Battalion Chief with San Diego Fire Rescue.
All right, great. And Chief Pernesti, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Joe Pernesti. I'm with the City of Elyria, Ohio Fire Department, just west of Cleveland, and I'm an assistant chief there. Thanks for having me again tonight.
Well, we appreciate you being here, Joe. Always got something to offer. And now we have a first-time roundtabler with us tonight. Chuck, introduce yourself and say hello.
Hello, my name is Chuck Bassett, outside of Detroit, Michigan. Southfield, firefighter paramedic for 15 years.
Nice to have you with us. So folks in the chat room, if you are with us, you've got a comment. So the topic tonight is all about ventilation. And I just have to set the ground rules. And the ground rules are this. We get in the fire service and we start with always and never. And I just got to tell you, after enough years doing this, always and never don't work. There's a lot of discussion on ventilation in the fire service today. Everybody cites new science, which, whatever that is, everybody cites fire behavior. There's a lot to talk about here. And what I want to say is I don't really know I think there are some wrongs. There are rights and wrongs, but I guess what I want to say is I think you need to know what conditions people are using their various ventilation theories in. I think we need to talk about that and figure out where they are. So let's start. Chief Whitley, you've got a lot of fire behavior background. You were doing this with the folks from Great Britain many years ago. You're involved with Kill the Flashover. What is it when I say all about ventilation? What does that mean to you?
Well, that's a pretty broad area of stuff to talk about. But when I think about it, I'm thinking more of the air control piece of it. Can I control the air going to the fire without making more holes in the building? Now, and of course, the context for me is if the building is still a fairly intact box, I want to keep it that way. If it's already, well developed and, the roof's already opened itself and things like that, well, then, closing it, my context is to confine the air to keep from getting to the fire. But if I can't do that, then I'm going to use more traditional methods. Typically, I'm not going to ventilate right away.
Okay. Perfect. And let's get that point. And if there's some, I mean, we can disagree with that. I actually have the big button. I can disagree with anyone at any point. That's Warren's theory. Chief Ling, where are you? Are you on the traditional side, or has your opinion changed, or where are you on this?
My opinion is vastly changed, primarily from learning what I've learned with Chief Whitley and Kill a Flashover. I always learned that there was two types of ventilation: vent for life and you vent for fire. Unfortunately, when most people say they vent for life, they start banging windows out of something before they have enough water on the fire to control it. And they're doing anything but venting for life at that point. They're actually going to cost somebody their life.
Right. So, okay. So you were a traditionalist, shall we say, and you may have changed your opinion a bit.
I was taught, open up the roof because it lets the smoke out. But 9 times out of 10, I watch people light the sky on fire. It's just my thought of ventilation is completely changed. I very rarely order anybody to the roof. I'll do horizontal ventilation over vertical ventilation any day after I see signs that I need to ventilate. When I know I have water on the fire, I'll take the windows at that point.
Okay. Let's see, and I think Rob says, something. I mean, where is it you ventilate? At the highest point directly over the fire. Why are we ventilating? To let superheated gases and toxic products out of the, I mean, those are textbook definitions that are probably still written in IFSTA today. Although I haven't seen the 6th edition. They're probably there. Those were the standard textbook definitions of what ventilation was and how to do it. So what is the West Coast? Let's just get a general opinion, Lane, before we look at some visuals. But what are you thinking about ventilation when I say that to you? Do you have a department history that does something different than what we're talking about?
It's very much a part of our corporate culture, the vertical ventilation piece. There's various reasons for that, the history and what have you, but our position has definitely evolved. And, the concept of the vent for fire and vent for life, the ventilation doctrine I was taught at the start of my career back in the 80s is substantially evolved in terms of what the ventilation is going to do for us, in terms of, we used to believe the lifting and leaning would take place in a burn building with Class A materials. That's what happens. But in a real structure fire, that isn't what happens anymore. And so we've really placed much more emphasis in the last, I'd say, 5-10 years on coordinating our ventilation in order to prevent that kind of growth.
Okay, makes sense. Chief Pernesti, what's going on in Ohio?
Well, I think we're pretty traditionalists as far as ventilation. But I'm putting an asterisk by that we have many that they want to try to vent, but just don't have the staffing. And there's a big difference. And, we don't vent a lot of residential roofs, but we are, I feel, at least in my department, ready and well trained to open up a Type 3 ordinary constructed roof and open up and clear out the cockloft. Ventilation, to me, is based on building construction and staffing and how you do it, whether it's vertical, horizontal, whatever.
All right. Makes sense. Thanks. And Chuck, what is your theory? What have you been doing? What were you brought up doing? And how does it work in your department?
When I was about 2008, we started doing the PPA ventilation. We use it when needed. I wouldn't say we use it all the time. I don't think there's ever one answer for conditions. Will pretty much figure out and dictate your tactics. Ventilation is a word that's always dynamic and changing. If you're looking at the UL studies that are coming out today, there's a lot of differences than what we were thinking 20 years ago. On top of that, what you're doing with ventilation is dependent on who you have and what you can do with it. And always the buzzword that everybody talks about that rolls off people's tongues is coordination. You have to coordinate it to make sure that it's safe.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Although it's funny that, all of these words came up and appear to be new, but, coordinated fire attack was talked, I want to say it goes all the way back to Lloyd Lehman and Emmanuel Freed and all of that, right? It was, I remember the old red books from Oklahoma University, have a charge line when you vent, meaning have water on the fire before you start opening up. And it almost seems that we evolved away from some of the basic tenets. I'm doing a program right now. I'm building a program right now where I'm actually taking the late 1950s material, reciting it and comparing it word for word for what we're being taught right now. And there are some amazing similarities, quite frankly. So, and we did have Chief Cagno joined us. Chief Cagno, what were you taught growing up about ventilation? Has that changed any in your mind now, or what have you?
Sorry I'm late, people, but no, obviously, over the years, with the dynamics of the fire behavior change and everything, we've taken a different approach towards ventilation. Years ago we opened up, shook up the building for everything, but I think that's changing now. We're not as aggressive or over aggressive ventilating nowadays.
When we talk about coordination, we just rely a lot on SOPs, right? So we just wrote, what do the SOPs say? The SOPs this or the SOPs that. I'm in a mindset today that ventilation is a tactical order. It will be an order given by the incident commander and maybe less automatic of where it was before. Just a thought. I mean, it's just something to be thought about. Lane, you have some photographs you want to share and kind of recount. Are you ready to do that now?
Yeah, sure, Pete. One of the things, we always talk about is find a lot of times you discuss different tactics, different operations with firefighters from around the country. A lot of times we end up talking past one another because we're really not even speaking the same terminology. So to that end, I can kind of talk what we colloquially will call we refer to as the West Coast offense, in that, how our truck doctrine evolved over the years. And so this is, one of our crews operating on one of our legacy style constructed building. It's part and parcel of our corporate culture, day-to-day operation. Truck company always goes to the roof. We invest a fair amount of time in training in it. As you can see, quite a bit, even in the academy, to the point where this is a shot from just the other day. These are a couple of high school kids, a couple of our cadets, doing it and even teaching them. But over the years, we've learned that at one time, this was considered desirable. This was, what we looked at as an ideal operation. And really now, knowing that kind of based on this information, this is from the UL NIST training material, that really taking the lid off doesn't necessarily give us what we once thought. And so really, we continue to do it, but it's definitely, we talk about in coordination with ventilation or with getting water on the fire. This is kind of the slide right here that we hang our hat on for continuing to vent for life as part of our offensive fire operation on residential structures, is that we found it's the most efficient way to get heat and smoke out quickly once we get water on the fire, in order to support the primary search and complete our other objectives. So that's kind of where we're at, just operationally on the out here on the West Coast. And one of the main reasons we can do it is that it's the walkable pitches. The fact that it doesn't snow out here in Southern California really allows us to operate a lot quickly on the roof, not having to worry about, when you have a steeply pitched roof, it does slow down your operation, limits the size of the hole you can cut, and what have you. So typically we will operate without a roof ladder, go up there just with aggressive sounding, and then cut a hole once there's water on the fire.
So did I just hear that construction will play a factor in how you do what you do and why you do what you do? You've got some things that maybe here in the Northeast or maybe Chuck over in Michigan probably has a different snapshot. Even Rob certainly probably has a different snapshot of that, as all of our roofs have got pretty significant pitches in many cases.
Yeah,
So-
very much the pitch of the roof. Lightweight construction, we found we've been able to engage on that within our operational timeframes. I can go into a little more detail on that if you want, but basically you're not cutting where there's fire involving the roof members. And we found that to be a fairly safe operation. That isn't where our problems have come. But yeah, definitely. And again, the attics out here, they're fairly lower because of the flat pitches. So we don't find a whole lot of converted attics, knee walls, those sorts of things, generally speaking.
So I think that, I think that's the kind of thing we wanted to talk about on the show tonight, because I think there are some specifics, the manpower, the way they're trained, so on and so forth. I think there are some specifics that allow them to do that. Now, there was a widely publicized incident, Lane, about I believe it was a captain who went through a garage roof, got very, very seriously injured in a situation. Does the weight of the tile roofs, or did that incident make any difference? Did that ripple through California? I mean, it certainly was a nationwide incident, but was there any ripple effect there?
Well, absolutely. And they did a very good detailed report. They brought in a lot of subject matter experts and really looked into that incident in a lot of detail. And it came down to some fundamental issues. I mean, part of it was PPE usage. There's a certain amount of danger in any task on the fire ground. And if you look at the reports from Project Mayday, 20% of Maydays are actually from roof ventilation operations. So that's a substantial amount. And that counts all the way from people falling through holes to people slipping off ladders, climbing up to go to the roof. So you have to recognize there's an element of danger there. That was, it requires a proper technique and people trained to that standard. And, one of the things that does, come into play like in that incident is human error. Anytime you engage in a task, there's always going to be a certain percentage of human error that's involved. And that was largely what happened there.
Yep. Okay. Chief Pernesti, you got a question?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna ask a question after this. I'm gonna disagree with some of what Lane said, if I could. And as far as the Fresno incident, I think the Fresno incident, and I don't want to get into that as far as placing blame, but I think that was maybe not so much human error as maybe just some traditions that, again, why would you want to get up and vent on that type of roof? I can't understand it. And then, like, I posed the question of, tell me anybody on here or anywhere that's listening, tell me one good reason to vent a standalone type 2 building built, say, in 2000, anywhere in the last 10 to 20 years, that has a well-involved fire at 3 a.m. Somebody tell me right now one good reason to get up and vent on a, AutoZone or Family Dollar standalone type 2 building with a good fire in it. Somebody tell me. I'm never going to do it. If you want to do it, that's fine. But I think it's silliness.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got, AutoZone is certainly, I want to hear a little bit from Warren. We know two things. We know the compartment size has changed considerably. What has the fuel package done to our thoughts on ventilation? What is the high heat release fuel? How has that impacted? Is that part of this discussion? I mean, certainly the fire triangle, fire tetrahedron, if you will, we're talking about the oxygen side, but what about the heat release rate, Warren? You got any comments on that?
Well, we've seen that the heat release rate in modern fuel packages is about 15 times what legacy fuel packages were. So that's a lot more production of smoke and fire gases and things like that we're trying to get out of the building. So if you don't have water on the fire yet, you are going to get a lean out, is what one thing that Lane mentioned they're looking for, but it's going to lean out and come back into the building with all those other fire gases. So, and Lane made a good point. They're not going to vent until after they get water on the fire, which makes sense to me if you're going to do it. That's the one of the criteria, I think, to make it a safer operation. Of course, it's all a risk analysis. That fuel release rate is what's compromising all of our old tactics.
All right, makes sense. Chuck, you had mentioned PPA, positive pressure attack. You said that you're doing it a little less now. What kind of got you to that shift? Was there a triggering event, or was it a series of operating conditions, resources? What got you?
The coordination is always something we're working with. PPA, it does have a place and time. With the houses we have here built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, we do have a lot of compartmentalized fires, and that's where you're going to find it's working very well. If you're having an open floor plan on the newer houses, you're not going to see as well with the PPA. PPV is always going to help you out, but you got to make sure. I think there was in fire engineering, they had something about the big three problems that they've had in the past, which is not having the large enough openings or an exhaust area. You got to make sure you're having like a 2-to-1 ratio to get that flow going. If you're not having that, it's not going to work out very well. Also, I think maybe Lane was talking about with ventilation, the horizontal ventilation versus the vertical ventilation. Getting up on a roof is going to take a lot of time, and if you can do it, through windows and get enough ventilation going, you're going to get a lot more done and get to that fire a lot quicker than putting people on that roof. And especially depending on the pitch and if there's a lot of snow up there, what you're going to encounter. So.
Thank you for that. We do have a bunch of viewers in the chat room. If you are watching us live and you feel like you've got a question or you'd like to interact with the panel, just reach out and we'll get you involved here for sure. The snow on the roof is obviously, that's a big deal for us. I can actually recall going to a fire where, somewhere it was about 24 inches wide and it ballooned out at the top and there was no snow in any of that space. It's a pretty good indicator of where you have to vent. Not really bright, but that certainly helps us out. Anybody else want to jump in before I ask Warren to talk about the Warren, I'm going to get to you in a minute, and we want to talk about the anti-ventilation and some of the discussions around that. Chief Cagno, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think the key is is to see what's happening after you start your tactical ventilation procedures. In other words, is things starting to change? Is the fire starting to change? As long as the dynamics are changing and you're seeing that you're getting effective results, then I think you stick with it. But obviously, if it's not, then you have to change what your procedures are. Regarding an incident, but. I don't think it matters whether it's vertical or horizontal so much. I think are you seeing effective results? And I think what happens a lot is we gear up to one motion, we stay in that one motion, and we're not seeing favorable results, and we don't opt to change.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of this that has to do with the incident commander. I mean, you don't stick with a bad plan. That's always the case, and we tend to do that. I see a lot of situations where we tend to do that. So let's we do have a question from the chat room. All right. All right. So Taylor has a question. He says, I've heard of positive pressure ventilation before. However, I've not seen it in person or know much about it. For someone who uses it, can you explain further? So there's really two things we're talking about, Taylor, and I quite frankly may have mixed them up myself. So positive pressure attack, PPA, is we are adding air while we are doing the fire attack. Positive pressure ventilation typically is after fire is knocked down and we're clearing smoke. But I'll yield to Chuck. Chuck, is there anything you can add? We could certainly go off on this whole topic, but can we make this easier for Taylor to understand?
I think you kind of hit on it there, Chief. It's the PPV versus PPA. A is attacking the fire. When you're setting up to go attack the fire, you're going to get this fan pointed towards the door, the entryway, making sure that you have an exhaust or exit point, and you start the fan up, give it about 20 or 30 seconds to make sure it's flowing correctly, and then you start moving in on the attack and put the water on the fire. Versus PPV, which is putting water on the fire and then venting afterwards to clear out the area. Each one of them has its separate points that are good, and just depending on what you have is what you're going to use. Here in Southfield, we like to use a PPA when needed with the confined different house fires. But like I was saying earlier, if it's open floor plans, it doesn't work as well.
Right. And I think one of the things that we need to talk about, and it's going to kind of segue into what I'm going to ask Warren about, is remember that when we're doing PPA or PPV, we're moving, tens of thousands of cubic feet of air into the building. Whatever your 16-inch electric old-fashioned smoke ejector does, maybe it's 10,000 CFM or 15,000, whatever it is. And then you've got gasoline powered fans that go up to 30,000 CFM. So it's the addition of air versus the subtraction of air. And I'd like to have Warren talk a little bit about that.
All right. Well, one thing I look at is, a lot of it depends on your size up. You still have my context is a vent limited fire. So the fire doesn't have enough air to really burn as well as it would like. So part of our tactics that we talk about in Kill the Flashovers to prevent those firefighter-induced hot rich flashovers we see on YouTube all day long. So if we can limit the air, even with simple things like doing your 360 and the residents left the front door open, close the door while you finish doing your walk around. While the guys are getting ready to go in with their hose line and their face pieces, keep the door closed. We don't want to add any new air to the fire. If we cut down those flow paths, we're putting the fire in neutral. If we have a window that's successful and the fire's coming at it, the transitional attack of putting water on that fire from the outside, then going inside, is a quick way to get a knockdown and get some moisture in there. As Joe says, Joe Starnes, moisture is the kryptonite to fire. They can't exist in the same spot, in the same little area. So what I usually look for, that's my go-to move is seeing if I can limit the air. If not, then I have to rethink and maybe do some more traditional tactics. But for compartmented buildings especially, this is a really good technique because you have better ways to limit the air when it's cut up with walls and doors and windows. Not the windows so much, but the doors.
So Warren, let me ask a question that if people are not familiar with this after all this discussion, isn't there can I be the devil's advocate and say, well, you're trapping the smoke and toxic products in the building. That's not good for the victim. You're allowing heat to build up for the victim. So is this not counterintuitive to things that firefighters have been taught for years? How would you respond to that?
Sure, it's counterintuitive to what they've been taught, but our data shows that in any smoke storage room, the most you're going to get at the ceiling height's 500 degrees. And of course, that gradient goes down as you get closer to the floor. The other thing is, this in many cases can get you much quicker extinguishment than you can follow up with PPV or hydraulic ventilation and get those products out of there. So you're really I think you risk a lot less exposure overall in the time frame of you arriving and extinguishing the fire than you would in some of these other techniques. You're really not making it worse for the victim.
Okay. I think that there's a lot of discussion as it relates, and it's almost more tactical than the ventilation side of this discussion, which is what we're here for tonight. It might be another night, but why, in Europe, in many cases, and in some departments around the United States, they're actually hanging curtains, right? So I've been teaching for years before I realized what I was saying. I think I realized it, but you know, my slide in my presentation used to say, what's the difference between forcible entry and ventilation? And the answer really is nothing if you're the first person to do it. When you open that door and we have to gain access, what do they do in Europe, Warren? So, I mean, I got to go through the door with a hose line at some point, whether I've done a transitional or whatever. What do I do about that?
Well, if we look at the Germany model, they're hanging what is called a smoke blocker curtain. I call it a portable door. But it's a curtain that doesn't reach all the way to the bottom of the doorway, but it gives you a methodology where you can block the air and still allow people in the hose line to pass through fairly unimpeded. So you're not introducing new air in developing new flow paths for the fire to gain more oxygen. So they're not making the fire worse by forcing that door and then leaving it wide open. If you don't have a curtain, there's other techniques you can use to control the door, whether it's Mongo sitting there feeding hose through the door that's cracked 4 inches, or you take a Sawzall, cut the corner out of the door so the hose can pass through and then close it. So there's a lot of techniques, but the whole idea that they advocate is keeping new air from getting to the fire.
All right. And again, many of us, and I'm saying this for the panel members and certainly the viewers, this is the topic of many of Firehouse kitchen table debates here, certainly. Rob, have you done any in your department? Have you done any anti-ventilation? And if so, have you tested this on a working fire yet?
Yes and no. We ran a spell of fires where PD showed up before us and busted every window out of the building that they could possibly get their batons on. And what was probably not such a severe fire by the time somebody called us, by the time we got there, was out 6 windows and the front door. Past that, we actually went through a period of time as well where guys would vent windows before we had water on the fire. So now it came down to a point of training where if I'm standing on the front lawn, or I was standing on the front lawn, if I saw the steam conversion, I might call for ventilation. Normally what I would want my engine boss to do was he was the guy to call to vent the windows. He would call the truck and say, all right, we got water on the fire. We're making good progress. It's darkening down. Take a window. As a matter of fact, I don't think I ever sent somebody to the roof of a private dwelling to put a hole in the roof. Even if I had an attic fire, I would take the gable ends or pull soffits and let the smoke leave naturally. While I could get a good size up on seeing what I had left up there, before I would cut a hole in the roof, because I mean, it's just my opinion and just my experience. We were just never really good at putting the left and the right together. One would always happen before the other. And it was usually, if I had an attic fire, if my guys were cutting a hole in the roof, I could cut a hole in the roof in 15 to 20 seconds. Although when I have the guys down on the second floor of the private dwelling and they're trying to gain attic access, and they come to find that the attic floor is plywooded over so the family could use it for storage, and now I have no attic access, now I have a hole in the roof and the fire is way in front of me. So I was always one, let's get some water on this. Let's darken it down. Let's look for our steam conversion, and we'll worry about ventilation at that point.
All right. Sounds good. Lane, you had a comment there.
Yeah, very much so. Rob, thanks for bringing up the whole attic fire piece. Actually, when we talk about venting for life, I was actually just in a meeting the other day where we were talking about ventilating attic fires. And, to that end, there's a lot of information out there let's pop this up here. This piece of information right here, I don't think has gotten the attention from the American Fire Service that, quite frankly, I think it deserves. There's really a lot of information contained therein that really speaks to keeping the attic fires vent limited. And, you know, what we used to consider digging out an attic fire led to, and if the crew has trouble getting water up in there, once you cut that hole, any kind of steam conversion, you know, getting back to Lloyd Layman basics, any kind of steam conversion or indirect attack on that opportunity goes right out the window, because that steam's going to go up and out through that hole. We end up flowing a ton of water, and, you know, what we used to consider a quote successful attic fire ended up being a big soggy mess that, armed with this information, maybe we can avoid in the future.
Yeah, well said, well said. And that is a good study. If you have not paid attention to that study, please look that up. Google that about residential attic fires, and there is a good report out on that. I do think that it is important. It was not lost on me that you said in a talk on ventilation, you said everything goes out the window. I just want you to know I noticed it. All right. You know, I'm not going to let you off the hook on that one. But that's easily done. Chief Cagno, attic fires, how have you handled them in the past? How would you approach it now?
I like what Rob Fling had to say. I think I have to agree with what he's talking about. You know, too often we just get stuck in that same old mentality of doing the same thing the same way for the same reasons, when you know, we need to be more diversified, and we need to look at exploring other options. What we've learned recently, what's going on with kill the flashover and the dynamics of fire behavior changes and stuff like that. I think we need to explore a whole new tactical avenue instead of, you know, a very narrow mindset. So yeah, I agree. I agree with what Rob said, and I think we need to change.
All right. You know, it's funny, when Rob was telling the story about the attic being used for storage, I had a friend of mine who was quite the you know, he was like a cartoonist. He wasn't a classical artist, but he come in one day and he had a picture of a firefighter on a roof poking down the inside ceiling, if you will, and pulls the pike pole up and comes out with the plastic Santa, because all of the Christmas decorations were in the attic, you know. So as you're trying to poke down the ceiling, you're getting all of the stuff that is stored up there. Chief Pernesti, what attic fires? What is your thinking? Have you looked at that report? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think that report is undervalued, without a doubt. And I think every firefighter needs to take a look at that. You know, again, it comes back down to construction conditions and whether or not I have firefighters capable. Listen, not every firefighter is capable of getting up on top of a peaked roof and opening it up. Again, it's construction specific. My town, very high, steep pitches. Again, I think there's other ways to vent a residential roof. Doesn't mean we won't try it, but I'm more like with Chief Fling, that we'll try to get the gable ends open, try to get the steam, oxygen limited. There's a great, anybody that's listening to this, I recommend that you go to Vimeo, I think I said it right, which is kind of like YouTube, and type in LA County Fire Department attic fires. It is an awesome 5 minutes of describing attics, how they're vented naturally, how to control an attic fire, and they stress keeping it as oxygen limited as possible. Again, go to Vimeo, put in LA County Fire Department attic fires, I think it's called.
Yeah, Vimeo is a great resource. YouTube has changed dramatically. So YouTube is still the University of YouTube, as I like to call it, is still good. But Vimeo is another great resource. Chuck, what's going on in your world as it relates to residential attic fires? Commercial attics are completely, you know, cockle fires and so forth. That's another issue. But residential attics in your world, Chuck?
With the residential, obviously, you're not going to, introduce a lot of air to it. One of the things I was going to talk about, which was we have the piercing nozzles for larger attic fires that we can get. You got to get ahead of the fire really quick. If you're not up there, if you don't have the nozzles to be piercing through the roof, you're not going to get ahead of it, and you're going to lose the whole roof. That's one thing we try to get here. Our guys at Station 3, the crew I work with, they're pretty quick. We're excellent at getting things done. And that's just one thing as far as bringing air and introducing it into an attic we try not to do.
Yeah, so tell me about your use of the piercing nozzle. At what position are you gable end? Are you through the roof from the top down, bottom up? How are you using your piercing nozzle? What's your methodology?
It really depends on the fire, but usually we're going to come from the roof down. But you got to make sure you leave enough time for you to set it up. A lot of times, if you're too close to the fire, it's going to pass right by you. So we try to get them up and in place first thing.
Okay, good. Chief Whitley, you've done some experimenting with a tool called the fog nail. What is your methodology? Is it top down, gables in? What has been your success, and what do you have to say about that?
Well, fog nails are mini piercing nozzles. You can use them on 1 3/4 lines. In Europe, they'll use them on a 1 inch or smaller line. And generally, if depending on the size of the structure, you're either going to have to move it around or use more than one, depending on how well it was involved. Because once you hit a section and it's converted to steam, you're wasting your time leaving it there. You need to move it to where there's actual flame to get the conversion. But usually top down, gable in if you want to. I'm not a big fan of going underneath, because if the ceiling falls, you're basically opening up the upside down bathtub of the smoke and fire gas products onto you. So anywhere from the exterior is what we advocate.
Right. And those are relatively, I don't know if you know that right off the top of your head, Warren, but those are relatively low flow as compared to the standard 1 3/4 piercing nozzles, right?
Yeah,
what are those flowing?
It's about 20 GPM.
Okay.
And they're really fine droplets, which are helpful.
Right. So as we begin to, we've been at this for almost 3/4 of an hour, gentlemen. So what do we want to tell the viewers? There is some ventilation. Can we come up with some generalities? There will be some ventilation. We've heard the term coordinated tonight. I've kind of made a couple of notes so that I can make a summary statement at the end. But what do we want to leave the viewers with as it relates to ventilation? We've said the words in the course of tonight's program. We've said coordinated, we've said horizontal, we've said vertical, we've said vent limited, we've said fuel limited. We've tossed around a lot of stuff here. And ventilation is a task. It is a fireground task. So my question is, what kind of decision-making can we give to our viewers? Obviously the standard answer out of this panel, and I say it many times every week, is it depends. But the fact what it depends on what are some of the variables that folks that are listening can talk about as it relates to ventilation? Warren, you want to jump in first?
Oh, sure. Why not? I mean, there's so many variables, and everybody's mentioned building construction is a big one. If it's lightweight, that's going to tell me I'm going to do something different than a lot of folks would do. I'm staying off the roof, period. Is it vent limit is, my general starting point. That's where I start my decision tree. If it's vent limited, I'm going to keep it that way and go from there. But one size does not fit all, I guess, is the main point I would make.
Yeah, that's where we kind of started with. It's never always and it's never never. Although I did say never always, so kind of contradicted myself. Rob, what are some of the variables as we talk about this ventilation situation? What are some of the variables? Construction is well laid out there. What else you got?
I think it's extremely dependent on your size up. If you get there and it's vent limited, keep it that way. If it's out 2 windows or 3 windows, guess what? Fire's already ventilated. You don't need to do any more. Do your loop, give a good size up, and let the guys with the water dictate what's going to go on. Don't let the truck guys just start opening a building up, because it's going to chase the engine guys right out the front door.
Yeah, I think Warren raised the term the reverse bathtub effect. I mean, we've heard any number of stories where even at, we were talking attic fires, somebody grabs a pull down stairway and pulls it down, and basically you've got a pressurized space up above that's coming down that stairway, and it's for lack of a better term, black fire. It's heated, superheated fire gases, which, as we all know, are fuel. That's the piece I think we all forgot, right? Superheated gases, we talked about toxicity. The fact is that smoke is fuel. And I think when we're talking about the ventilation conversation, that's got to be part of what we're doing. So, Lane, what do you got? Some of the other variables outside of what Warren and Rob did?
For me, it all boils down to the fire triangle. There's only 3 things that are going to change the way the fire is behaving, and we really only have control of 2 of those. And my advice to a lot of people is, I'll tell you, a lot, as somebody who's a big practitioner of vertical ventilation and roof ops, a lot of departments enjoy a lot of tactical success by not working a whole lot of time up on the roof. And so there's better ways. There's other ways to skin the cat, and they're all centered around controlling the air, getting water. Water changes the equation. With our understanding now of heat, gas contraction, all those other things, what steam's actually doing inside the building is it really should impact how you're ventilating out there and when you're ventilating. It definitely doesn't have to be vertical. If you're manpower limited and you have a choice between going up and cutting a hole or getting water on the fire, for me, that's a no-brainer. We got to get water on the fire, and everything gets better from there.
Excellent. And although Lane just referenced skinning a cat, I can assure all the viewers that no cats were actually harmed in the filming of this presentation, because I get some dangerous mail for that, for sure. Chief Cagno, what are some of the other variables as they relate to ventilation?
I kind of agree with what everybody else has been saying. It's no longer a vertical or horizontal mission anymore. The one thing I would add is that we need to broaden the communication aspects in the ventilation operation. We need to communicate a lot more on the fire ground as to whether we're being effective or not. But we need to start exploring a lot more methods here. We've proven that there's a lot of different things that are out there that are working, and we can't just go about doing things in the traditional fashion anymore. How many times have we pulled up to the tree deck, a balloon frame, and right away, everything's topside ventilation. But we need to start doing things a little differently. So I would have to say we need to communicate a little bit more, and obviously we need to explore the different options that we have at our disposal.
Okay, very good. Chief Pernesti, what do you got?
Well, those are excellent comments. I like to say that Chief Cagno added that communications thing. If you're a young fireground commander, I think first thing is you got to locate where the fire is at. And then communications, for years, we never really communicated as far as getting water on the fire and when to communicate. And I think departments have to add that to their procedures, to when there's water being applied to the fire, that has to be communicated for the truck company or whoever's doing your ventilation to open up. But you got to find a fire. It comes down to construction and coordinating that fire attack and training. We really didn't say much about training, but you can't just expect. I will say this, that in my area, there's sometimes departments, including my own, that think that they can just race to the roof of a residential structure at 3 a.m. and get the hole that they see on YouTube. Nah, that ain't gonna happen. That it just ain't gonna happen. If it does, great, but not No, just doesn't happen.
Well said. Thanks, Chief. And last and certainly not least is what do you got, Chuck? So what are some of the variables? What do you use to consider in making your decisions, and what can we share with the viewers?
I think a lot of people talked about, that big word we're always talking about is coordination and getting on the radio, making sure everybody's talking to each other. But I think even bigger than that is what is your staffing? Because if you're running with 2 guys, there's not a lot you can do with ventilation. You need to see the fire too. That's important. But if you only have 2 guys versus if you have a full-time department, what has your city left you with as far as a full man staff crew? Or do you have, like even one guy sometimes coming to a fire by himself? How much can you actually do? There's a bravado statement saying, what are you scared of, a little smoke? Well, I don't think that's what it's about. It's about finding the fire and getting in there quick as you can. If you're venting and getting that smoke out of the way, you're going to find the fire a lot quicker. You're going to save lives a lot quicker.
Yeah, well done. I think there were a couple of tidbits that just came out at the end, and I'll kind of summarize. Is that, I think your crew. What is your crew? What is the size of your crew? What is the capabilities of your crew? And what was the training for your crew? We went up and we got an angled roof prop, and we cut some pallets cut with tar paper and shingles over them, and that's how we trained on roof ventilation. And now suddenly they're faced with something different. Even some of the things we taught in the old textbooks, cut a 4x4 hole if it's a residential structure. That's not even real. If your intention is to do that, cut a hole that's large enough that will reduce the pressure inside the building, right? It is all about high pressure and low pressure. And we see these 4x4 holes cut, and fire is shooting out of it 15 feet in the air because there is such intense pressure, if that's what your theory is about how you do this. So I think training, I think the experience level of your crew all matters. And I think that this discussion has to take place at your next officers meeting. I think your discussion needs to take place with your training chief or whoever's doing it. There has to be a concerted effort among your department. All of us sitting here on the panel from all across the country, literally all across the country here, we're not going to help you. We can give you and share some of our experience, but the fact is we can give you guidance. You need to figure out what works in your department. It's the old gasoline commercial. Your mileage may vary. So I think that's important, that you need to be able to measure your resources. I think response time matters. If it's taking you're in a small rural area, your response time is you've got a well-advanced fire, that's going to change the conditions. That's going to change what you're going to do. Rob said size up, which is my favorite pet peeve. Size up is something we do, and then we don't do anything about it. Oh, I saw that. Yeah, it's a single family residence, and it's type 5 construction, and it's whatever. And we give this beautiful radio report. And then you say, well, what did you do about that? Well, yeah, we put a line in the front door and cut the roof. We don't always react, and we're a little hesitant to change strategies after we made a size up, I think, in some cases. So let's leave it at that. I appreciate the people that watched us in the chat room. I appreciate the people that reacted, and my thanks to the panel. We couldn't have these shows without you folks giving up some of your time to pass it forward, if you will. And I see that there's a much bigger panel. People were nervous last week when they saw the Pete and Warren show. I think we got the sympathy vote tonight. So I do appreciate everybody's efforts. We will be here next week. If you've got a topic that you'd like to see on the roundtable, if you've got something you'd like to see, we'll try to assemble it for you. Send an email off to pete@petelam.com. So we will see you next week at 8 p.m. Eastern.